Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
Well, welcome everyone. This is Navigating Bonds. So we're going to talk bonds for a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about the really interesting stuff, which is bonding and interesting mixed income, a mixed use project that I've got the experts on here that I think we'll talk about sort of some financing options and structures and other things that I think you'll find really interesting. We're thrilled to be part of it. But by way of introduction, I'm Mike Schrader. I'm a bond attorney in the public finance group at Orrick Harrington here in Portland. I've been doing this for a long time. I'd ask you to raise your hands if we've been on a conference call together in the last year, and probably several hands will go up. All right. Well, that's one. Thank you for the opportunity to work with all of you. But it also, I think, evidences that we've got a lot of traction and a lot of momentum around bond financing for affordable housing projects. I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Jerry Gillum, who's the city manager at the City of Sutherlin. So again, after we talk sort of bonds and trends and topics on bonds, we're gonna have Jerry talk about an initiative proceeding at Sutherlin that he's leading us on. And then Deb Flagan of Hayden Homes, who's gonna show us what we're gonna actually try to build in Sutherlin on this, but really two just really great leaders in their communities and in the housing space on this. So again, excited to just talk generally about some housing, some bond things, what we're seeing in terms of some trends, and then we're going to pivot, and then we're going to talk some specifics around the initiative in Southern, which I think you'll find interesting and really inspiring too. Okay, I hit the wrong button. There we go. So I want to talk and just, again, I decided not to get into weeds and give you the nuances of 501c3 bonds or volume cap or other technical tax issues. You can call me or my team members anytime and talk tax or bonds or those things, but wanted to just make some observations in terms of some of the things that we're seeing and sort of maybe some trends and things like that. So I want to start and talk about some best practices, particularly with projects that are maybe having some forms of distress. Talk a little about some of the trends that we're seeing, and then finally just talk about some cautionary tales, if you would, and things just to be careful with. So let's start with just some ideas on best practice, and some of these things are basic, but I want to say them out loud nonetheless. I guess the first thing is know your documents. As you know, when you get to the end of when you close a transaction and a bond finance project, you've got a whole range of bond documents, bank documents, tax credit documents, various regulatory agreements, compliance documents, subordinate debt documents, gap funding documents. You've got a host of things in there. Some of those things are consistent. Some of them have slightly different requirements. So really taking an inventory, preferably before you close, but certainly after you close, make sure you understand what those commitments are, whether it's reporting, whether it's affordability levels. Take particularly note of your time frames. You know, we don't really mind getting the call the day before a termination date on your outside date for conversion that you're not going to make it, but that's kind of a problem because that's a default. And if you require a tax opinion, we can't actually instantaneously print those out. We actually have to do some diligence. So know your documents and just understand what your time frames are on those. Post closing, I know no one likes to pay lawyers, but continue to engage with your counsel. It can be a lot less expensive having those counsel conversations early. In fact, in almost all instances, it's less expensive to have those conversations with your counsel, whether it's your LIHTC counsel, whether it's us as your bond counsel, or others on that, to make sure that you're identifying issues early and you've got a plan of action around those. And then for projects, you know, have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C. Even on, you know, that's not on the back end, that's often on the front end. We're seeing more and more deals change. We had a really interesting project we thought was all fours on that, and Fannie said, oh, we haven't seen that before. That's going to take us months to do it through the project into a complete loop. So having those backup plans and flexibility is really critical as well. Charles, there's a nice chair right up front here for you. I had to stand yesterday and I was uncomfortable. It's a long time to stand. So great. So what are we seeing in our practice? I would say 5 years ago, we would close a bond transaction, 4% LIHTC deal, and we would go to the groundbreaking and the grand opening, and it was great. And maybe we saw a final cost certification at conversion, and we were done. We now have a, I don't know if it's a cottage industry. We are seeing a lot of, we were seeing most transactions back before construction delay, issues with conversion. We are seeing certainly the majority of transactions over the last 2 or 3 years coming back for some kind of a tweak or an adjustment, some major, some minor on that. We're seeing that coming back on that. This goes to the first point, know your documents on that. I'll talk about reissuance here in just a minute as well. When you're modifying or changing documents or need those adjustments, it's really critical that you're reading your documents, making sure you're paying attention to tax compliance and other issues as you proceed. I think right now I've probably got a dozen projects on my desk or my team's desk right now that's requiring some kind of an extension, some kind of a modification, some kind of an adjustment, some kind of modification to get to a conversion requirement on that. Most of the time, it's just a matter of leaning in and getting to the business deal and documenting the business deal. But for example, if your project isn't placed in service and you've negotiated your new deal with your bank, and that makes the bonds be treated for, and I'll talk a little bit more about reissuance, that can be a real problem for your tax credits. So that's just a for example of why you need to keep your counsel engaged on these projects. We're seeing increasingly, you're getting through construction, you're getting into lease up, it's taking more time, it's more expensive on those things. You're not hitting the stabilization you had anticipated. You need new debt, or you've got capacity for increased, you've got some additional capacity. You may have some additional tax credits because of the cost overruns. You're generating some more LIHTC on those things. So we're seeing a host of things around adjustments to get to conversions. We've seen some transactions where you've got one construction lender, a different lender on a forward commitment basis, and you've just blown all the conditions around the forward commitment. So you either renegotiate, and oh, guess what? That forward commitment had an interest rate 2% below what the interest rates are now. So the forward purchase perm lender is not a bad thing for them to get out of that rate, if you would, on that. So we're seeing, these are negotiations, if you would, but again, the earlier you can engage the team, your team with counsel on these issues, oftentimes the better result on this. We spent some time last year's conference talking about the reset on the LIFT program, what I call LIFT 2.0. Those are grandfathered in. So if you're getting new LIFT now as part of your conversion, you have to upgrade your documents, which can cause some heartburn for some of your lenders. I see a couple nods out there. You've been through this, okay? On that, that's the condition to those dollars. You've got a new scheme that you've got to be under. So just again, all these pieces and how those pieces fit together can be really critical. What else are we seeing? This goes to the rate environment. Now, fortunately, rates have stabilized somewhat at this point, but there's definitely, we're not in the land we were even a couple of years ago in terms of interest rates on that. So we are in fact seeing most of the time we'll see variable rate bank purchase variable rate construction bonds. So if you're building your project, you're borrowing on your senior debt, your tax exempt debt, you're borrowing on a drawdown basis, borrowing the money as you need it. So you're paying interest on the money when you need it, not just parking it somewhere. That's most of the time, that's variable rate in most instances on that. And so we're increasingly seeing sponsors saying, I'm a little uncomfortable with that variable rate. That can go up. So what can I do about that? Well, one thing you can do is what's called an interest rate swap, which is a separate contract where you actually flip the variable rate to a fixed rate by an agreement with your bank. The other thing you might do is you do what's called a cap, which is just what it sounds like. It's a cap. It's that you buy a contract that maximizes your upside risk, your rate risk with respect to your variable rate on that. And there's also something called a collar, which puts a top and a bottom on that. Those are all going to be business decisions, what your risk tolerance is around interest rate, how much flexibility you have in in your financing in terms of that ability to have that interest rate risk on your variable rate during construction. But all of those kinds of contracts have tax and bonding and documentation implications on that. So you need to make those decisions early so you can have a relatively smooth and not unduly complex and expensive execution on your transaction. The other thing that we're starting to see more of, I'd say just a few years ago, we rarely saw any kind of a public offering. Everything was a bank direct purchase. And while most construction loans continue to be bank direct purchase transactions, that is, you negotiate your construction and permanent financing with a single bank, or perhaps one bank for construction and one bank for perm at conversion to do the takeout, we are increasingly seeing different kinds of executions where you're actually going into the public municipal bond marketplace on that. Now, why would you do that? I don't know, it's a headache. Oftentimes, I didn't say that out loud. No, there are definitely advantages to do that. It can be rate, it can be terms, it can be in conditions. We've seen a handful of projects recently back with the Fannie MTEB, Municipal Tax-Exempt Bond Program on that. That's actually a public offering. Typically, you put a cash collateral, a construction loan behind your bonds during construction, and then when you get to conversion, it flips into a Fannie. It's called an MBS. It's effectively a Fannie Mae guarantee on that, and you have publicly offered bonds. So mostly institutional investors will actually buy those bonds on the public market, not so much on the strength of the project, but on the strength of the Fannie MTEB guarantee. And again, there's lots of quirky terminology around it, but it's a guarantee on that. And so you have highly rated long-term bonds for your project. Again, we'll see a cash collateral bond where you do a construction loan, just a direct taxable construction loan. The bonds will be publicly offered, but for a number of reasons, the bonds themselves are cash collateralized during the construction period. And so the bondholder is actually buying a bond that has this pile of cash, bond proceeds, or construction loan proceeds standing behind it. There's a number of reasons why you would do that. Oftentimes, it's just a bridge to the permanent financing. But it's also a way, and this is where rates matter, if you issue all of your bonds up front, you have a pile of money, if you would, and that pile of money can be reinvested. Sometimes, under certain conditions, that can be reinvested at a rate that is higher than your rate on your bonds. That's called arbitrage. And that's a nice thing. Now, you got a bunch of tax rules you have to comply with to do that, but that can be an opportunity. The other wrinkle in terms of these cash collaterals, these fully funded bonds at closing, again, think about a construction drawdown bond. You're paying interest on your money as you borrow it. With a publicly offering, you get all the money up front. It's very rare that you're going to get that incrementally. The investor is going to put the money in the pot, and it's going to sit there, and then it's going to get dispersed for project cost or use over the course of your construction of your project. The other thing that differential is you're paying more interest because you've got all the money up front as opposed to actually advancing it over time. But that additional interest can be added to your qualified LIHTC basis as well. Now, believe me, lawyers should not do math, so I'm only going to talk about that at 10,000 feet on that, but that can generate additional basis. So, but the difference between the arbitrage, potential for positive arbitrage, and the ability to generate additional basis for LIHTC is a way that you might want to consider a public offering instead of a bank direct purchase on this. So again, it's a variety of things. A lot of this depends on your risk tolerance on these things. We've seen some underwriters come in and they're doing something that's a little bit between a public offering and a direct purchase. And they'll come in and do what's called a limited offering, and they will go out to maybe a handful of institutional investors, sometimes one. We like it when it's one because you have one to negotiate with instead of multiple on that. And they'll actually do a limited offering to some kind of an institutional fund or investor who will buy those bonds long term. I would say on the public offering, again, they're more expensive in terms of transaction costs. There can be some that typically take a little bit longer time. There's more process because you have to actually offer the bonds into the public markets. Depending on where the market is. I mean, you don't want to do one of these in the middle of December because there's just no market for them. But doing them in the middle of January is fine, and doing them in the middle of November is fine as well. And there can be other blips in the municipal market that can impact your ability to do a public offering. And of course, credit as well. So again, there can be some execution risk. associated with public offering, but there could also be some real advantages too, and some long-term savings. They're typically a little covenant light, if you would. You still got people paying attention to your construction draws and those kinds of things, but again, they can be from a administrative standpoint, can be a little lower cost in terms of the administration through the construction period and otherwise on that. So again, increasingly we're seeing public offerings, and I think that trend is likely to continue. Again, we're bond lawyers, so we like to focus on tax-exempt financing. What's out there? What are the opportunities? What gives you an excuse to call us and have us help you borrow money on this? We are having the last couple of years, I mean, so many conversations around with the private activity bond volume cap shortfall on this, and we know we're going to be, we heard yesterday that one of the sessions I was at on the Orca is that, no LIHTC available now, and we'll tell you when we're available in the next cycle on this. I think OHCS has done a great job in terms of managing with the Orca system in terms of allocating tax credits and those things. But there needs to be alternatives to a private activity bond, 4% execution on these projects. So increasingly, we're seeing interest in 501c3 bonds. And the beauty of 501c3 bonds is while they don't generate LIHTC, now that's the biggest challenge. They don't generate that 30% of your project equity or whatever that number is for your 4% LIHTC. They do generate tax-exempt interest on your long-term debt. And that can be very flexible depending on what your 501c or your exempt purpose is on that. And it can not only be capital A affordable, think 60% AMI and below is what we mostly do here in Oregon, but it can also extend to workforce or middle kinds of housing projects as well, depending on what the exempt purpose is. And this is why I've got these smart people with me here to talk a little bit about middle housing, and I'll talk a little bit about 501c3 flexible bond financing in those projects as well. We've done, I think last year we reported in this conference, we'd actually done a recycled volume cap program on a project. We've got interest in that program, but if any of you have needs to do tax-exempt financing where you need real equity in the project and you don't have an opportunity for LIHTC, I think OHCS's position is, I can't speak for them, but I'll kind of speak for them, is if there's demand for a recycled cap program, I think we'll see a recycled cap program. But if there's not demand for it, which there's been some interest, but not high demand yet. So I think as we see more gap funding and other kinds of resources, I think there could be increased demand for recycled cap programs. There's certainly, we see them in a lot of jurisdictions with volume cap shortfalls. California, New York, Massachusetts, a number of places, Washington State, all have recycled cap programs. Again, another tool with 501c3 bonds to get you to tax-exempt long-term debt. We're also seeing significant interest in market conversion projects, taking a naturally occurring affordable housing project or other kinds of market rate projects and converting those into deed-restricted affordable housing projects on that. There's a host of issues around your transition, moving it from a market to an affordable project or a market to a middle project on that, but we're seeing a lot of interest in those bonds, and I've got colleagues around the country who are actually doing those. I think the area that we're going to talk about here is the middle income and workforce projects. We've done some just fascinating structures, unfortunately out of state so far, around some special purpose 501c3s, bonding projects that are out there, some really interesting P3 public-private partnerships. And again, on a 501c3, once you start moving into a middle housing structure, the reality is that the term P3 public-private partnership gets bandied around a lot. Any affordable housing project financed with tax credits is a public-private partnership. Let's be real. They don't get done unless you have that public-private partnership. But a more structured partnership structure is really essential on a middle housing project, because you can't form the 501c3 for middle housing under a lessening the burdens of government theory, which is the theory under which you form those entities, without having a government partner to do that. So it's really a hand-in-glove partnership between the private developer or sponsor and the governmental entity in terms of forming the C3. And again, to give a little more context as we talk about the project we're working on in Sutherlin. All right, tax reissuance. Okay, this is a bit of a boogeyman out there And I got an email yesterday where someone was trying to figure out how to do a workaround on a reissuance on a bond. And so let me give you just the reissuance basics. So this is, if the message here is on reissuance, pay attention to your documents, call your bond counsel, figure it out. It's not a big deal as long as we talked about it. Okay. So this is reissuance. Okay. Reissuance is a concept. It means a material change in the terms of the bonds that result in the obligation being reissued for tax purposes. So you've issued your bonds, you've blown up, something's blown up, you've increased the interest rate, you've extended the maturity. That's a material change in your bond terms. Now the IRS treats that as a new bond or a reissued bond. Well, what does that mean? Usually it means you need to file another form and you need the issuer to sign something. Sometimes you have to have a new TEFR, a new public hearing. Usually it's not a big deal, unless you've done that before your project is placed in service. And for a number of reasons, that's going to effectively blow up your tax credits. So don't reissue your bonds until your project is placed in service, but talk to everyone when you know you're going to have to adjust the terms of your bonds. Sometimes you just do a two-step amendment. Lots of workarounds on that. Again, almost all the time, it's addressable. You can deal with it as long as you're paying attention to it on that. Typically, that requires you to get what's called an NAE, a no adverse effect tax opinion. And that just assures the bankers that agreeing to the change in terms does not affect the tax exempt status of their bonds. We've given literally dozens of those opinions over the last couple of years. It's not a huge expense. You got to check some boxes and do some things on that. Like I say, the message here really is that compliance with reissuance rules is typically not problematic or difficult, provided it's timely, and it can be accomplished with little expense. Final point, just to underscore this. I got this email I'm thinking about yesterday, and it's like council in DC is emailing us on a project here in Oregon, and they just want to jump through all these hoops to avoid a reissuance. And it's kind of like, why? We'll just check the box. We'll file the form. If we need to have a hearing, we'll have a hearing. But it's like, we've got to do a catch-up payment. We got to adjust this amortization. Like, no. So strike your business deal. Figure out what the business deal is that you need, and then we'll figure out how to deal with the tax compliance. But again, figure out that business deal early, and we can document it appropriately. Okay. We're seeing a lot of projects, like I said, as it began here, we're seeing a lot of projects come back for some tweaks or adjustments. And, restructuring has it's on a continuum, if you would, in terms of restructuring. So sometimes we're just seeing, okay, we've got some conditions to conversions that need to be waived or can't be satisfied, or they're delayed. We've got an ability, most of the time, we've got an ability to upsize our permanent bonds. We've got, again, our ratios are good, rents have gone up, other kinds of things. So right-sizing those permanent bonds. Sometimes we've got the opposite problem. You got to downsize the permanent bonds as well. So those are the kinds of things we're seeing. As I indicated, you get too far out ahead of the terms of your forward purchase agreement, you got to renegotiate that. Anybody with a forward purchase agreement right now has probably got a much more favorable rate than they would if they were entering into it now. We have seen instances where the permanent lender they got sent down the road, if you would, because they couldn't get that renegotiation of that forward purchase agreement. That looks much more, again, think about restructuring kind of on a continuum, sort of early tweaks and adjustments versus sort of major restacking of the capital stack. We're increasingly seeing an infusion of additional public funding, particularly additional lift funding coming in, not at construction close, but coming in as a condition to conversion, getting projects to conversion. We've also seen that with the Metro Geo housing bonds on several projects as well. The other issue that arises from time on a regular basis on this, as costs have gone up, you've got to always look back and see, did I meet my LIHTC 50% test on this as well? Because if costs have come up, remember, you have to your bonds have to cover more than 50% of your eligible costs in order to have tax credits. We're a little stingy on our volume cap, so you get a 5% cushion at the time of issuance of your bonds on that. So always be monitoring your LIHTC compliance, particularly when you've got including when you have multiple buildings, and meeting that 50% test. It's really painful when you've got a big project and you've got $30 million bond, but you do your 50% test and you realize you have to issue another $1 million of bonds. And guess what? That transaction cost on that $1 million of bonds, it's just about the same as the 30 million on that. So there's ways to adjust that, monitoring that early, looking at your sources and uses, and there's ways to manage around that as well. But it's, again, it's important to know what's in your documents and pay attention to those things. Of course, the other part of this is when you're trying to get to conversion, you've got some shortfalls. In others is sponsor contributions, that developer fee. I'm sorry, guys, but sometimes that developer fee is the first casualty when you've got these cost overruns and those things like that. And we know that happens often. But again, it's having a plan A, plan B, and plan C around those restructurings. But again, the message really here is these are out there. These are happening. We've got great sponsors and developers in Oregon doing these. A lot of these are just the factors that you're all well aware with and dealing with on a daily basis in terms of cost overruns, delayed lease up, rising interest rate costs, and so forth. So that's kind of, again, just kind of a high level overview of some of the things that we're seeing as bond counsel out there. Again, as always, we're happy to just call us, talk to us. We're happy to just check in terms of your projects and any compliance issues that you have. We're happy to just share notes and innovate around positive solutions. But this is where I'm excited to have my teammates up here are with me to talk about what's happening in Sutherlin. I know there's a lot of innovations around the state on this, but I think, challenges also bring opportunities as well. And whether it's a volume cap, scarcity, or rents that don't keep up with expenses, all of these things create opportunities for innovation and creativity and collaboration. So I think, like I said, I think some of the more interesting things that we're spending time on right now is again, this creation of special purpose entities, SPEs, with the power to issue tax-exempt debt and meet a broader range or continuum of housing needs. And that's been, like I said, very interesting. A couple of projects we've actually closed on some projects that have been really creative, really innovative. Part of the creativity and the innovation around that, I think, is exciting is not only do you have a quality sponsor or developer building the project, but it's required the city or the school district or someone else to bring the land to the table, if you would, effectively taking the land somewhat out of the development costs on the project. The other element of this that is really interesting, and this is what Jerry's going to talk a little bit about as well, is how do you get the employers to lean in when we're talking about middle or workforce housing or certain levels of affordable housing? Again, this is all depending on where your AMI is and how you're financing things on this. But what does it look like if the city brings land or the school district brings land? But what if the hospital and the school district or other employers are committing to a first fill on rents, or they're actually investing directly for a preference on a right to rent? I think these are where we can start to move the needle in terms of making an additional moving that needle from sort of affordable to middle or mixed even on that. I think these are where some really interesting things are happening in this space as well, particularly when you can go to a city and say, you've got a housing problem. Here's a way we can do some rentals. And oh, by the way, you can drive this project, but you don't have to be the developer. You don't have to contract it. You don't have to put it on the city's balance sheet. And you don't have to be a landlord or a tenant on this. So this creation of these special purpose or P3 entities is really a valuable tool that can create a lot of flexibility for a city or a local government who's trying to work through significant housing issues in their community. Okay, so that's the bond spiel for the day from bond counsel on this. Now we're going to talk about the fun stuff on this, and this is why I'm thrilled to have Jerry and Deb with us here today. So, Jerry, I'm going to hand the mic to you to talk a little bit about the vision for the Sutherlin project, and then we'll just kind of pass the mic back and forth among ourselves.
Yeah, do you mind if I stand up? I'm a pastor's kid, grew up in Albany. Anybody stay awake through that? Holy frickin' moly, that was so above my head, I don't even know what to say. I love you, Michael, but I couldn't sit through one of those. So, I mean, that would just pull my fingernails out. I don't know. So, just a little about me. I grew up in Albany, pastor's kid, went in the military, did all that stuff, got my undergraduate, got my graduate degree, did all that, became a city manager, went to Iraq, came back, injured, wound up in Sutherlin. But I want to explain how we got to this point, because there's a backstory to it that you have all been seeing play out in the communities for the last 3 or 4 years. And that is, you ask me about the 5 critical roles of local government, and I can name them like that. Been doing it my whole career. 31 years I've been in city management, from Nissa to Gresham to Scappoose, Madras, Baker City. I've been there, done that. Homelessness wasn't on my agenda, and it hasn't been on our agenda, but it actually served as a catalyst to make us think outside the box a little bit. So for years, we stayed within those 5 areas of local government, public safety, building, planning, engineering, streets, parks, admin, legal, all that stuff. We've done that. We perfected it. Then all of a sudden, we had some homeless people sitting on a bench on our central avenue in downtown. And I got the call. I'm the city manager. It's my job. I'm responsible for everything that happens and fails to happen in the city. And so I had to do something about it. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals made their ruling. So we had really only 2 options. Let them stay there, sleep on the public facilities, or find an alternative. We immediately went out and found a 1-acre piece of property, and we cleared off all the homeless people. The next day, they were off our streets. And to this day, you do not see, we're a population of 9,000 people, but you do not see any encampments in the city. There's only one place they can go, because the law says that's where they have to go if they don't like it. But what we learned through that process is we started out a system of what we called a program of care. We allowed them to set up tents in one corner of the property, and then we brought in these little housing pods and said, if you enter a program of care and you commit to getting better as you proceed in your program of care, we're going to move you on to possible housing. What we discovered is the 53 that were there, there's like 30 now, have no interest in being in a program of care. But we still continue to move in this arena over here, put in housing. So my point is that it's not something I've been trained or had experience in doing. It was just intuitive. We had to take action because federal, state, county governments weren't doing it. We had to solve our problem locally, and we did. And so right now, if you want over there, it's a fairly clean camp. We put them in 8x10 A-frames and say, we bring in the agencies, but by law, it's just a camp. It's like an RV park for the homeless. And that's where they are. Our streets are clean. We don't have any. And the other thing, if you talk to other city managers across the state, like I do, I'm on the board of directors, but Nikki in Roseburg says their police department, 70% of their police department's time is now being taken up by dealing with homelessness, because they never went out and got a site to put them on. Ours, it's less than 10%. Whenever there's a problem, it's on that one site. When something's stolen, it's on that one site. We can solve it and fix it. But that taught us something as we went into this process here, is that, hold it, these people are homeless, but we have another 100 to 200, the school district is telling us, and the agencies, of people that are sleeping on couches, living in garages, that are actually working and need a place to live. And then I go and I talk to our industry specialists, the large employers like Lone Rock Timber with Toby Luther, CEO, and Evergreen Medical and Orenco, and they say, superintendent of schools says, I can't hire a metal shop teacher because they can't afford to live here. So we have either nothing, we have 0 vacancy rate. Believe it or not, there are no rentals available in Sutherlin right now. We have a higher end apartment complex being built right now by Tim and Nicole Clark. I told you about him earlier, but we don't have anything. And so what we're able to do is enact the same energy we did when we responded to homelessness and say, we're going to take it upon ourselves to come up with a solution for this. And so we, behind my council's back and my staff, we went out and found a piece of property and negotiated a purchase and sale agreement. But luckily, we were at the League of Oregon Cities annual conference in Eugene last year. And my mayor and two councilors were there, and a group called the iSector were there. And they had a little booth there, like these folks had booths. And they said, we are organizing ourselves to help local governments figure out a way to construct workforce housing. And I said, I'm in, signed up. And we got a call sometime. We were still moving on this property when we got a call from iSector. They adopted us. And what they did is they developed a list of like 6 to 8 criteria that was required before they would come into a community. But in the meantime, we had already organized ourselves. So if you can see this, go back. Don't ever touch that until I tell you to. Just kidding. Michael's, he tolerates me. So you'll see the 8 things that iSector asked for, but you'll see where we moved ahead of them to do some pre-organizational tasks at the city that is much akin to strategic planning. And what we discovered is that if we don't have a piece of property and our community doesn't see the problem and support it, and my council doesn't see the problem and support it, and not only that, if they don't trust the staff to carry it out, it'll never happen. So we had to build in those trust things right up front very rapidly. You notice I went behind their back, but luckily iSector saved the day because they presented the same thing that we'd been working on that I hadn't said to them. And so it made me look good. Hard to do, by the way. So you'll see, are there currently local regional developers, builders willing to partner with you in this endeavor? So for the local government, that was very, very, very important. Once we got the property, we need to have that in place. We knew that the agencies had our back. They had funds that could come in and backfill what we're doing, but that kicked in federal government guidelines like BOLI, like we were talking about, but that's okay. We're local government. We have to do that anyway. So we made sure we were organized. Next slide now. Sorry, Michael. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings. Sure. Yes, I'm sure. Shut up. Oh, you did. This is very good. I didn't do this. So determination of who we're building home. Okay. Hayden Homes, they're here with us. Oh, okay. So once we got the community on board, we organized ourselves and we brought in all these major employers and agency stakeholders to a big meeting. And we presented to them the concept of this project and they said, we're in. But present to us, so how do you get private sector and federal government agencies to intersect and actually cooperate together to make something happen? It's like oil and water in a way. It can be difficult, but the agency that makes that happen is the local government. We have relationships with both. We're able to bring them in and say, let's come up with a way to do it. So all the private sector folks said, create a mechanism where we can invest at some level. So that's where we're at right now. We're working with Michael. He's creating a 501c3. That was one of the first things they said. We're creating investment options and models for private sector to come into it. But how this works and the reason it works is that we own and control the land. We're buying that land. We're contributing the land to the project. We're also either reducing or waiving system development charges. That's what we're bringing to the table. So when private sector comes in and says, what do you want from me? I'm going to say, well, I'm doing this. What are you going to do? And it's really helped. So we're doing that. So at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're working with Hayden Homes to come up with a structured finance, a financeable home or tiny home or rental unit. And so we've developed, do you have the schematic of the property? So we actually found the property. We've broken it down. Yeah, that's all Debbie's. Okay, so that's kind of that's how I got them to buy into it. I had an employee who just recently retired and she liked to draw. So I paid her $300 to come in and draw this out for us. And we set that and said, what do you think of that? Could you buy into it? They all said, yeah, if that's workforce housing. The other thing we discovered in this economy, I was telling Deb and Mike this, that about 76% of our population qualifies or fits within the criteria of low income, simply from working in Sutherlin. Those are the wages. And so even a high school science teacher doesn't make enough money to buy a home unless we can make this available to them. So we're in the process of brainstorming a number of options. One is Murphy Plywood wants to buy 3 or 4 lots. They want to buy 3 or 4 homes and make them part of a benefit package for employees who come to work there. There are individuals who are sleeping on couches right now, or single mothers, single fathers, small families who are barely making it, who could buy into this because we've made it so affordable. And I guess it just goes back to you need people like Michael and Deb to come alongside. You need your local community to come alongside, and then you need the local government willing to step out, take a risk, and say, we're going to make this happen. So we are going to make it happen. It's coming about. We're in the process. We've got $4 million already awarded to us from the state of Oregon. We got another $7 million coming from HUD, and we're going to use those monies to underwrite the costs, and we're going to build into the framework of this. Are you going to address that, the framework in the deeds, in that it's workforce housing? And if we're going to buy down the cost of the home to, say, a $200,000 home that would normally be $450,000 out there, you can't live in it in 6 months and sell it for $450,000. You know, that's his job to fix that and make that work. And that's the big thing that all the investors are wanting to know. So city's in at this level. When he starts talking about the stuff he talked to you guys earlier and all that stuff, I wanted to fall asleep with you. But I didn't. I held on. So that's it from my point. This is why the city's doing it. This is our motivation for doing it. We think it's going to stimulate economic development. I'm working with, the people you were talking to, they also own the industrial land. So I'm working with bringing in an industrial employer on this land. If we're competing with Cottage Grove and Roseburg on both sides of us for land, and they know that we offer housing for their workforce that could come here, that could afford to live here, we think it gives us an edge. And plus it bolsters the existing industry that they are actually willing to invest and grow their business because they know their employees have a place to live. So that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't offend anybody.
Hey, Jerry. I want Jerry to talk about one more slide, though. And then Deb's going to talk about what some of this looks like, which is really exciting. No, we're going to get there, Jerry. Want to talk about that list?
Yeah, so when I mentioned earlier, when we acquired the property and we met with iSector had those 8 things they wanted to have in place. We did, and we brought iSector to the table to meet with Douglas County, Evergreen, Ford Family Foundation, Great Northern Trailer Works, Housing Authority of Douglas County is working, co-applying with us right now for us. They were so excited about it. They brought a grant opportunity to us to co-apply for $7 million to help build. We got 1.5 million in CDBG grants to build a community center there, because this is going to have CC&Rs. It's going to have a community center and probably daycare for the people living there. And we're actually looking at making it a gated community like every other high-end community, but it's going to have CC&Rs and requirements for sustaining it through time. And all these agencies, Hayden, HUD, Brian, if you don't know Brian from HUD here in the state of Oregon, he's a great guy. Served in Iraq with him, actually. Murphy Plywood, Orenco is our largest employer at 500 employees. Southern School District is actually our largest employer with 1,000. Umpqua Bank, of course, Umpqua Economic Development Partnership, Orrick, unfortunately, OHCS, NeighborWorks Umpqua, Aviva Health. All our health agencies are on board, and they're waiting for us. They've been sitting waiting, but we had to acquire the property and get Michael, create the 501c3 and create this menu of investment options. So we're going to present this menu of investment options to them and say, look, you can just contribute to the 501c3, take your tax write-off and write off in the sunset. Or you can invest in the 501c3, be part of the 501c3 and own something. Or you might want to just get a return on investment where a small company will donate $1 million if I can get, 2.5% interest, whatever that would be that Michael works out, those types of things. So that's what we're working on next.
Thanks, Jerry. I hope you sense Jerry's enthusiasm and leadership that is making this go from concept to reality on this. But I wanted to have Jerry get through that list just because it really does take a village to build a village on this. And they've really convened. It's truly a community convening. So now it'll be a pleasure to turn it over to Deb. And Deb, I'll get back to your beginning slides and talk about Hayden and then what it's going to look like.
Thank you. My name is Deborah Flaken, and I'm the Vice President of Hayden Homes and Simplicity Homes. I'll just go a little bit over who our company is, and then I'm going to talk about this incredible partnership. Before I start, though, it's really incredible to see a group of individuals that are dedicated to affordable housing in our state. And if you haven't been commended for all of the work that you do to make sure that our state has places to live, we're very grateful. So thank you for your work. Hayden Homes is a 35-year-old company. I've worked for the company for 25 years, and we're based in Central Oregon. We are the largest private home builder in the Northwest, and we're building in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. And our business model is that we really build in mostly rural communities. So Sutherlin is a perfect example of a community that we would normally build in. And our business model is to evaluate the area medium income wage earner in each one of our communities, build a house that family can afford, and then we go up from there. And we do that in all 65 cities that we do business in, and that is in the 4 states. We have 2 different, he'll go back just a second. We have 2 different partnerships. We have our Hayden Homes communities, which maybe you all know or have heard of, and those are in cities that we actually build a model home, and then we actually build a community around it. And then we have Simplicity Homes, and Simplicity is a sister company of ours. It was started in the middle of the recession, and it was because people were walking in, because we build in these rural communities, people were walking into our model homes, and they were saying, can you build this model home on our land? Because most people had their own land because they lived in the country. What we learned is that there's very few custom home builders, and if there are custom home builders out in those rural communities, they're very expensive. And so what Simplicity was able to do was take the buying power of Hayden Homes and our trade partners that we had in these local communities and be able to build those stick-built homes in those communities. So we're now building in 140 different cities in the state of Oregon. That's how many permits we pulled from, different cities and municipalities. Simplicity is also our really private-public partnership arm. We're working with many different cities to build homeless villages. We're building workforce housing for quite a few orchardists throughout Washington and Oregon. We're doing transitional housing for homeless facilities as well. And in addition, now we're also building cottages and beyond, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, we're partnering with community land trusts in many locations. And we're working with them to actually build their housing stock. And then obviously they own the land. And so it's a way for them to actually get the units built. Next slide. And then just quickly, we have a charitable arm. So the affordable housing piece is really near and dear to us. It's called First Story. We built 100 20 affordable housing. This is individuals that are making 80% area medium income or less. And we build this in our Hayden Homes community. It's a zero down, no interest loan for 30 years. And we're really excited because that's 100% private financing. There's no public financing that's involved with that. Next slide. Okay, so I met Michael probably about 4 years ago when we were working with Bridge Meadows. Michael is one of the board members with Bridge Meadows, and Bridge Meadows was building in a Redmond community that we were building in, and that's how I got to meet Michael. And we talked about bond financing. Hayden Homes had never been in the LIHTC or the bond financing world, and so I learned a tremendous amount. Obviously, he's a wealth of knowledge, and really grateful for what we've learned over the time. Jerry and I met, as he said, a year ago at the League of Cities, and Jerry is a big thinker and an incredible. He's not a dreamer. He actually goes and makes it happen. And so he walked in and said, "Hey, Deb, I hear you can build some workforce housing. Come talk to me about what you guys offer." So I show this Oregon housing ladder. We created this about a year ago because as I'm meeting with cities, largely when I'm working with cities that are more so on the homeless piece and the transitional housing, many of the people that are sitting in the room often believe that you can go from transitional homeless shelter to a market rate rental in one step. And all of you that are in this room know that that's impossible or almost impossible. The other thing is that we also got a lot of questions about what is this middle market housing, because we all know it's very confusing. What does it mean? Is it rental? Is it for home ownership, etc.? So we give this overview, and this is really what Mike and I started looking at in regards to the types of housing that we were going to offer in Sutherlin. Next slide. So the top three pillars there are these 3 pillars here. And when I sat down and we talked about what are we going to build in Sutherlin, and Jerry explained what he was interested in offering, we were talking about these 3 different areas, which is the middle market rate rentals, which included apartments, plexes, cottages, maybe ADUs, and that would be on a rental basis. Then we had the missing middle ownership, that would be the plexes or the townhomes and probably cottages or small single families that would be for at an affordable rate that they could afford. And then we also had the single family ownership, which would be at 120% and above. What we ended up deciding that we were going to do was between 80 and 120%. If you want to add, you tell me, Mike. I'll hand you the, okay. So next slide. Okay. How about we go to the triangle? Let's go one more. Yeah, I think it's after that. Did we?
Let's talk about the
triangle. Okay. So we, in every community that we build, we have an affordability triangle. And what the affordability triangle says is that we look at what the area medium income is based on HUD, family of 4, in the cities that we build. So in Sutherlin, it's 76,400. Yep, thank you. 73,300. So that family of 4, if you take 7% interest and you equate that at 30% of their annual income that would go towards housing, that means that that family of 4 can afford a home of $290,000. Then we compare it to what the median home price is in the community. And as of July, the home price was $424,000. Then we look at the gap. So what is the gap between what that family of 4 can afford and what is the houses trading at? That difference is $135,000, and we call that the affordability gap. And we can see that in every one of our 65 cities, there is an affordability gap in every city that we see. In Oregon, they are largely, they are larger in the state of Oregon than they are in Washington and Idaho as well. So our goal was, how do we bring a house to market that meets 290,000 or a $300,000 house? And so when we had that conversation, we then started putting together an array of houses that we believed that we could build, and we now have prices to be able to do this. So how do we bring in housing that someone can afford at 300,000? So there's basically 4 different product types. We have our cottages, and these little cottages start at 600 and 880 square feet. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, no garages, just with a storage area out the back. So there's 2 different plans to choose from there. These actually, these are going to start at $160,000. So that's what we'll be able to offer those homes at. Next slide. And then we have our small footprint. So when we talk about density, these are not attached, but you can get up to 9 to 12 units per acre by doing this, because they have a very small footprint. And this is a 1-car garage. This is 1,000 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. The bedrooms are upstairs. And the second one that we're offering is 1,268 square feet. So similar, 1-car garage, 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath on this. And then the final, we have a couple of duplex lots, which will have a 2-car garage, 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath. So different ranges. And then the final one that we will be offering is a 9-plex apartment. And this 9-plex apartment is 1 and 2-bedroom units. And one of the units on the main floor is accessible unit as well. These are selling at, for a 9-plex, it's about 1.9 million is what that home would, or that apartment would go for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and Jerry or Mike, if you want to add to it. So we're going to be offering these different units to the employers. So we're going to go out to the employers, and this is there's 2 keys that I think are really important from a private developer. This public-private partnership, we look at it a little bit differently in regards to what we think the synergies are. You're basically taking the best of all worlds. I don't do what Mike does. Mike's excellent at it, and I don't understand it 100%, but I'm grateful that he does, and he can talk to Jerry, and he can talk to the employers, and he can figure out how to get it done. Jerry is coming to the table every day, and the biggest thing that Jerry brings to the table is he has a city council member, a mayor, or a representative or a senator that is actually advocating for this property and this community. And they're taking the lead on saying that they want to do this. It's not a developer coming in and saying, hey, we want to do this. We're actually coming in with this as a partnership. And then we're coming in as a developer, and we're doing what we do best. We're just going to offer the best price that we can, and we're going to sell that to either the employers and or to an individual, depending on how Jerry wants to set it up. But that's that collaboration. And I think that that's the important part of that private-public partnership. So the last piece here is that we will be sitting down with the employers, and this is the cool thing, is that this stacking of financing is critical. Being able to Jerry's gone out and gotten a federal grant in regards to be able to buy the land. That's one item. Secondly, we had through the HB 1730. Am I saying that right? Help me, Trill. 1570. 1570. There were some dollars that were for the infrastructure, 3 million for the infrastructure. They're working on another program now that Jerry was just talking about for another 7 million. So they have all of these different ways that they're stacking this financing to be able to pay for this project. we are going to be able to take the land out and just sell the home. In many cases, if there's an employee that wants to come in, or if there's someone that wants to buy these, there is going to be a deed restriction on it. Obviously, because there's dollars, and we're very supportive that if there is any federal dollars, any state dollars, that there has to be a deed restriction. And we don't care if it's 10 years or if it's 60 years or 100 years. We think the more time, the better. It's not how maybe all developers feel, but that's how we feel, is that if there's investment from the state and the federal government, that there should be a return for that. Someone can actually go in and buy a house now for $190,000, and they can actually get a loan for it. And they don't have to actually have any additional dollars per se to actually buy that house, because they can afford it at 190,000. And it's because Jerry has come up with a great way to be able to buy the land and put the infrastructure in, etc. I think that's all I have. Yeah.
I'd like to add something that's really critical. She taught the critical role that we're able to play in local government is we're able to bring federal agencies to the table to interact with a private sector like development. That Hayden Homes, all they want to do is build homes. They don't want to deal with the federal government's rules and regulations, but we do it all the time, so we're good at it. So we're able to bring them to the table and actually create a partnership that really isn't, it's not like a formal partnership, but we're able to like say, all right, we're going to take community development block grant funds, which is $1.5 million, and build a community center that they could probably never do. But the requirements of community development block grant requires that you have an environmental, the city has to own the property. You got to have 51% or 41 or 51% of the population benefiting from it be defined as low income, all those things. And so what we're able to do is take advantage of a perfect storm of the work that they did, bring that to the table, get that part done, and let them do what they do best and build homes. And so it works because we each do what we're organized and are and good at.
Just some observations here. Again, I'm the bond lawyer. I'm the finance guy in the mix here, and I'm not a banker, and I can't do math either. So, but what's been really fascinating about this is with the conversations we're having regularly with developers. How do I get volume cap? How do I get LIHTC? How do I move to the middle? How do I do mixed use? All of those things. This is absolutely fascinating for us and a lot of fun, and we're really excited to be part of this. But I think a couple sort of things that I've observed on this, that again, we come into projects at different points in development. Sometimes it's fully baked. You just need to issue your bonds and off and run. Sometimes we have conversations earlier. These earlier conversations are what makes my work a little more interesting on this. But I think where Deb and Hayden and Simplicity start with that. I missed the slide. I wish I'll share the slide with you guys if you want. It should be in the materials that are posted, but that affordability pyramid, if you would, on that, and then showing what that gap is and how do you close that gap. But really starting with that AMI, we're not going to come back with some product here that we can't afford. We're not going to start talking about value engineering. We start with an AMI and understand what our population can afford, and then we build. And these are nice homes. These are nice, attractive homes that the people are excited to be. So starting with that AMI in the community on that, Jerry's bringing land and infrastructure dollars at a minimum, along with leadership and these intangibles that you need in terms of entitlements and all of those kinds of things that are absolutely critical. So you start looking at that and say, okay, I take the land out of the equation. It costs Deb $190,000 to build the unit, but you take the land out. That's not part of that equation. So the land comes out. The SDC comes out because you paid for the infrastructure and those exact same amounts. So again, you're targeting in on that pricing on that. A lot of the materials you're seeing here have been gleaned from the chart, if you would. A number of these things is we've had meetings of 20, 30 people, Jerry, across the community to sit in those meetings. I put back to this slide because this is where we kept coming back to. What type of homes are we building? Who are we building for? And all that, and sort of answering those questions. And initially it was like, moving that conversation out of the homeless camp to a continuum of need was really, I think the lights went on for several people after a couple meetings even on that, but sort of starting there, because then again, what you're building, who you're building for becomes critical in terms of how you finance it. Obviously, again, I'm a bond guy, so we're looking at debt financing, lowest cost debt financing, but also minimal debt financing on this to make the project work. The other thing I would just note here, I'll jump ahead to a slide, is to Deb's point and on this, when you do have this public investment, you want to make sure it's protected long term on that. And so one of the other conversations, this is actually the site plan, which is actually really cool, where we've actually started to place cottages and rentals and single family on the site. And this was like, everybody wanted to talk about this. This was great, really visioning what's on the site. But we also created this little slide in terms of protecting the public and private investment. Again, you don't want to sell a house under market, then had to get flipped 2 or 3 years later, or it's not for the intended use. Now, also remember intended use, you've got this overlay of fair housing, the employer participation going to dictate some of that, who's investing in all those things. There's a host of complicated issues on all of this, but we created this continuum here, if you would, in terms of how do you have absolute control over the rental or ownership long term. And so again, just a continuum to sort of think about, okay, it's owned by a special purpose 501c3. You can dictate who lives there. You can assure long-term affordability. What happens if the employer owns the building? What's that look like? And then when you get into ownership models, is it a community land trust? Probably. Or is it something that's got a long-term deed restriction on it as well? Now, again, or you just market rate on that. So again, all of these are factors that go back to that question: who are we building? What are we building? Who are we building for? And so forth on that, which again will dictate our financing structure as well on that. So we're really excited to move this, to see this project move forward. Like I said, I think the next piece is, as Jerry alluded to, is this employer engagement, going to public and private employers and seeing what the level of engagement is on that. Again, I think there's ways to build this project and finance this project without employer participation. But if you can pull the school district in, or the lumber company in, or the hospital in, it's just a way to make the project more viable, a stronger credit, and really truly a community asset on this as well. I think we've got 7 minutes left. We can give you your time back, or we can ask questions, or I can leave it to Jerry and Deb for any final comments.
I got a joke. No, I'm kidding.
Happy to take questions on any and all of the above. Joe? I don't think we're there yet. I mean, the employer input's going to be key on this in terms of what the debt level is. I think, what are we looking at in terms of, I think with 30, what are we talking right now, about 20 something rental and 40, what are we total unit mix?
37 single family and the rest.
There's sort of 3 categories to recall. There's sort of single family, cottage, and rental.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And was that 60 something total units? 68 total units, but with a roughly equal breakdown between those 3 categories. Yes.
That seemed
but yeah, again, we've not got the bankers engaged yet, Trell, on that, but it's going to be largely dependent on what the employer participation or non-participation looks like in terms of.
The nice thing though about having different types of housing, the nice thing about having different types of housing is that you can do some as rentals, or you can do them as home ownership. And so it's not totally dialed in yet, because we want to get with the employers to see what they want to do.
I think the fair housing question is a good one. And I will say it's not fully resolved yet. We will be seeking, when this gets configured, we'll be seeking guidance from the Fair Housing Council and looking at and addressing those issues. There's certainly precedent for employer assisted or employer investments in housing and preferences coming with that. But there's, there's some general, it needs to be navigated. And I think the employer participation will dictate a lot of that, because if there's not employer participation, then and there's some tax rules associated with that as well. But it's a key issue on that, but it's going to be driven, I think, in large part by the level of employer participation. And Jerry, do you want to talk about size and scale?
Sorry, I'm not wearing my hearing aid, so I didn't hear a word you said.
Minimum.
I watched your mouth move.
Minimum size, minimum number of units.
Oh, well, I don't know. I never thought about that. I just whispered over to Deb. We have 3 local realtors in town. All 3, we're going to actually list this. If we didn't do a single partnership with the business, those realtors could have those lots sold in a month. And so, we didn't do any kind of penciling out of how many lots we need to make it pencil out, because it didn't, for us, it doesn't equate. For them, it does. But for us, it just, it's going to be what it's going to be, because we're going to make it happen. Whatever that number is, I don't know, but there's no minimum. And obviously there's a maximum, 168. Some of the little cottage sites that we've identified, we're actually going to allow for flexibility for somebody to have 2 of those lots and put in a larger facility, a larger footprint, right? So there may be some going down from the 68 down to 60, but we're going to allow that flexibility. I just know the 3 realtors I met with, our largest realtor probably in most of North Douglas County, our name's Mary Gilbert. She's on this group. And she goes, look, I can have those apartments sold in a week. There's that much interest in this. So we're not wanting to push the envelope. We want to continue the partnership and have the employers truly come in on board and allow for them to benefit for the workforce housing element for employment and economic development.
Regarding the size, because it's workforce between 80 and 120%, there's not really a requirement that you have to have a certain amount. Really, we could have probably done this with as little as 25. It's when you get into LIHTC funding and you're trying to get down to that 60% number or below that it really becomes, the scale is really important over, 60 units or something like that. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. I think it really comes down to what is the zoning. And this is another reason why it's so important to have a partner that you're working with. The city has the ability to come in and change the zoning. And if they want to come in and do something different, they can do that. And if you don't have them sitting at the table, it's, you're pushing water uphill.
Other questions? Well, we hope we look forward to, pushing this through and creating hopefully a model that can be replicated, and whether it's got an extra 0 in front of it in terms of number of units. But I think the notion of, we're excited about it. It's the notion of community building, using all of these tools, a continuum of need, if you would, and really starting with that leadership at the governmental level, and then pulling in all the expertise. As Jerry notes, there's no shortage of demand on this, but look forward to working with all of you and more creativity and innovation in the months ahead. So thanks, everyone.